Leah Prescott walked straight through a street full of people who feared Andrew McBride, stopped in front of the giant cowboy, and said, "Marry me." But the question he asked instead made her realize someone already knew far too much about the land she was fighting to keep. A bridle bit clicked against a hitching rail as Red Basin went silent. Leah had 19 days before the note on Prescott Meadow came due, and Paul Ralston was already circling the property. Andrew stood beside a nervous bay, one steady hand calming the horse while half the town watched from a distance. Leah met his eyes and made her offer. He listened without laughing. Then he noticed Ralston's envelope beneath her arm. "How did he know your note was due?" Leah had never told him. If you were standing in her boots, would you still trust the man the whole town feared? The first thing Leah Prescott noticed about Red Basin was how quickly a town could go quiet when one man crossed the street. She had been off the stage less than 10 minutes. Late summer heat lay over the Wyoming settlement, flattening the smell of dust, horse sweat, pine boards, and coffee drifting from the boarding house kitchen. Leah stood beside her worn brown valise while the stage driver unloaded a small tin document box and set it carefully at her boots. Across the road, a tall man stepped away from the feed store. Two ranch hands stopped talking. A woman gathering her little boy from the boardwalk drew him closer without seeming to mean to. The man never looked at any of them. He simply crossed toward the livery, ducked slightly beneath the edge of its awning, and disappeared inside. Leah watched him go. Behind her, the stage driver cleared his throat. "Big McBride." That was all he said. Leah picked up her box. She had 19 days before the secured note on Prescott Meadow came due. 19 days mattered more than somebody else's reputation. Mabel Cooper's boarding house stood across from the notary office, a narrow two-story place with white curtains yellowed by years of coal smoke. Mabel gave Leah a clean room, a wash basin, and coffee strong enough to make her eyes water. By supper, Leah knew 3 things. Her father had left her 38 acres southwest of town. Dry Willow Creek crossed the northern corner, and Paul Ralston wanted both. Mabel stopped slicing bread when Leah mentioned his name. "Ralston buys cattle," she said. "Moves freight, too. Owns enough wagons that half the smaller outfits owe him something by winter." "I don't." "Not yet." Leah looked up. Mabel set the knife down. "If you're planning to make that meadow pay, you'll need stock, water you can depend on, and somebody who knows the North Line." "Who?" Mabel hesitated. "Andrew McBride." The scrape of forks around the table stopped. Nobody looked at Leah. That told her more than an answer would have. The next morning, she went to Eugene Walker's record office. She spent 2 hours reading deeds, tax entries, and water filings, while Eugene watched from behind wire spectacles. Prescott Meadow was hers, that much was clear. What was less clear was how her father had actually used the northern water. Old references mentioned a shared ditch and Rockingham Ranch, but the records were incomplete. By noon, Leah was walking the meadow herself. The place had been neglected, but it wasn't dead. She found a weathered trough, half swallowed by weeds, and farther uphill, the shallow scar of an old ditch running toward the Rockingham boundary. She crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the soil. Dry on top, cool underneath. There was still water somewhere. That evening, she opened her father's tin box again. Deeds, receipts, freight bills, a horseshoer's account. One faded freight receipt had writing across the back in Isaac Prescott's hand. "McBride knows why the North Line was never sold." Leah read it twice. A knock sounded downstairs. Mabel appeared a minute later. "Man asking for you." Paul Ralston waited in the parlor, wearing a clean brown coat despite the heat. He rose politely. He did not waste time. "I'll buy Prescott Meadow." He named a figure large enough to clear Leah's note and put her on a train back to Kansas with money left over. Leah folded her hands. "Why?" "Useful ground." 38 neglected acres? "Useful ground," he repeated. Then he smiled. You've got 19 days, Miss Prescott. Better to leave with money than wait until the note decides for you. Leah's face did not change, but one finger stopped against the seam of her skirt. She had never told him when the note came due. The following afternoon, Red Basin was crowded after a cattle sale. Leah found Andrew McBride beside the hitching rail. Up close, she understood the silence around him. He stood roughly 6'7", broad through the shoulders, with the build of a man shaped by fence posts, cattle, hay bales, and winters that did not care how tired a person was. His hat was faded. One sleeve had been patched neatly at the elbow. A young bay tied beside him jerked suddenly at its lead. Men nearby stepped back. Andrew didn't. He placed one hand against the horse's neck. No yank on the rope, no raised voice. He waited. The bay's breathing slowed. Only then did Andrew look at Leah. She walked straight toward him. Conversations along the boardwalk thinned and stopped. Leah placed a folded sheet on the hitching rail. My land has a wagon cut, and water your ranch can use. You have stock, men, and a working operation I don't have. Andrew said nothing. I kept books for a horse and cattle company in Kansas. Freight accounts, tallies, contracts. Give me one season and I'll show you what I can make Prescott Meadow worth. His gray eyes moved to the paper. A partnership? Written. And after the season, we each walk away with what was ours. Someone near the feed store gave a quiet laugh. Leah ignored it. Andrew did too. Then she gave him the part she knew Red Basin would remember. And if you won't risk that much on the word of an unmarried stranger, marry me and put the agreement in writing. The street went still. Somewhere behind her, a bit knocked softly against a horse's teeth. Andrew studied her face. Not her dress, not the color of her skin. Her face. You read that note against your land? Every line. You know what you're proposing? I generally do before I say it aloud. Something almost changed at the corner of his mouth. Almost. Then Andrew took the paper. Come see the ranch before you decide you mean it. Leah had expected refusal, possibly anger. She had not expected that. Andrew turned to the bay, then stopped. His eyes had settled on the cream-colored envelope tucked beneath Leah's arm. Paul Ralston's name was printed in the corner. Andrew looked at it for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Miss Prescott. Yes? How did Ralston know your note was due? Leah did not answer. For the first time since stepping off the stage, 19 days no longer felt like her biggest problem. Andrew did not press her. He folded her proposed agreement once, slipped it inside his shirt pocket, and untied the bay. Rocking M is 4 miles southwest. Road forks past the cottonwoods. Take the left. What time? Early. Then he walked away. That night, Leah spread her father's papers across the narrow boarding house bed. She checked every receipt, every note, every envelope. Nothing showed that Paul Ralston should have known the due date. At breakfast, Mabel Cooper poured coffee into Leah's cup. You going out there? Yes. Mabel's hand paused over the pot. You've heard things. I've heard people stop talking. Sometimes that's worse. Leah buttered a biscuit. Sometimes it only means nobody knows the whole story. Mabel studied her, then topped off the coffee. Take the south road. Creek crossing's easier. Rocking M Ranch sat beneath a long brown ridge where cottonwoods followed dry Willow Creek like a dark seam through the grass. The farmhouse was sturdy but plain. The barn roof had been patched in 3 places. Saddles hanging beneath the shed were clean and oiled, though some had been repaired more than once. Nothing was wasted. A ranch hand collected his week's wages from Andrew near the barn. Leah noticed Andrew count the coins twice before handing them over. Later she noticed his own boots needed new heels. He had paid the man first. Andrew led her through the property without selling it to her. Well, he pointed. Hay shed, south pasture. Creek drops by August. What about the north ditch? His eyes moved toward Prescott Meadow. Shoo, hasn't carried properly in years. Did my father use it? A pause. Yes. Before Leah could ask more, a chestnut mare near the corral shifted her weight. Leah watched 3 steps. She's favoring the left front. Andrew looked at the mare, then at Leah. He took a hoof pick from a fence post and held it out. Show me. No challenge in his voice. No smile either. Leah took it. She ran a hand down the mare's leg, lifted the hoof, and found a small stone pressed beside the frog. She worked it loose and set the hoof down. The mare stepped again. Clean. Andrew gave one small nod. That was all. For some reason, Leah preferred it to praise. By afternoon, she was sitting in the storage room with Rocking M's freight ledgers open around her. Andrew had given her the books and gone back outside. He never hovered. Never asked whether the figures were too complicated. Near sundown, she found the first discrepancy. Then another. Freight charges routed through Ralston's company had been increased in small amounts. Too small to cause alarm on one invoice. Large enough to matter over 2 years. The next morning, Andrew found 6 receipts arranged beside his coffee. You're being overcharged. How much? $58.40 that I can prove. His coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. Leah pushed the figures toward him. He read them carefully. When he looked up, his eyes stayed on her a second longer than usual. You did that in one afternoon? I told you what I did in Kansas. So you did. She returned to the storage room after breakfast and stopped in the doorway. A rough pine table now stood beneath the window. The loose chair she'd used yesterday had been repaired. One new peg showed pale against the older wood. Andrew was already outside. Leah ran her thumb once over the new peg. She said nothing. At noon, she carried the corrected freight totals to the barn and set them beside his gloves. He looked at the papers, then at her. Neither mentioned the table. Something had begun between them anyway. Not affection yet. Recognition. 2 people learning how the other paid attention. The story of Crow Ridge reached Leah 2 days later. Harold Tate was fitting a shoe at the livery when she asked whether Andrew had always lived in Red Basin. The hammer stopped. 6 years? Since Crow Ridge? Harold lowered the horse's hoof. Who told you that? Nobody. That's the trouble. Everybody tells half of it. Harold wiped his hands on his apron. 3 men went after McBride that night. One left with a broken jaw. Another couldn't use his arm right for months. And the third left Wyoming. Why? Harold's eyes shifted toward the street. Folks remember what McBride did with his fists. They quit remembering what happened 5 minutes before. What happened 5 minutes before? But Harold had already picked up his hammer. You ought to ask Andrew. So Leah did. She found him behind the barn repairing a cinch. Rawhide ran between his hands. Crow Ridge. The rawhide stopped moving. Andrew did not look up. What about it? Peter Lawson. That got his eyes. Leah had heard the name from Mabel, a young wrangler, 15 or 16 then, gone after the drive. What happened to him? Andrew set the cinch across his knee. A boy got hurt. By you? No. The answer came fast. 3 men wouldn't stop. Leah waited. Andrew's hands rested motionless. I made them. There it was. Not denial, not apology. Is Peter alive? Andrew looked beyond her toward the western ridge. I hope so. Leah saw something then that Red Basin's stories had missed. Andrew was not afraid of what people thought he had done. He was afraid of what might have happened to someone he had failed to keep safe. Hoofbeats sounded on the road. 3 riders approached the ranch. Paul Ralston rode in front. He dismounted with a leather document case beneath one arm. I brought notice of a dispute, he said. Andrew rose. Ralston handed Leah a prepared paper challenging use of the northern dry willow water. Then he looked at Andrew. You involve yourself in this. Crow Ridge may become county business again. Andrew's hand closed around a fence staple lying on the rail. The metal disappeared inside his fist. Leah watched his knuckles whiten. Ralston watched too. For one long second, nobody moved. Then Andrew opened his hand. He placed the staple carefully on the rail. "You came with paper," he said. "Leave with paper." Ralston's smile thinned. He mounted again. Before turning his horse, he looked down at Leah. "Miss Prescott, if you're thinking of trusting this man, ask him what happened at Crow Ridge." "I already did." "No." Ralston gathered his reins. "Ask McBride what happened to the cattle that night, not the boy." He touched his heels to the horse. "The cattle." The three riders headed back toward Red Basin. Leah remained beside the fence. Andrew did not look at her. And for the first time, Crow Ridge no longer sounded like the story of a fight. It sounded like the beginning of something that had never ended. Leah read Ralston's notice 3 times that night. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Andrew mending the north pasture gate and handed him 4 pages written in her own careful hand. "What's this?" "Our agreement." Andrew wiped his fingers on his trousers before touching it. Leah had written down everything they had discussed. 1 season, separate ownership. Prescott Meadow remained hers. Rocking M remained his. Profits and expenses would be recorded. Either could end the partnership after the season without claim against the other's property. Andrew read every line. "You left yourself a way out. I left both of us one." He looked at her. "Good." He signed without changing a word. Eugene Walker reviewed the agreement that afternoon. His office smelled of paper, dust, and the stove polish used even when the stove was cold. "Marriage isn't what makes this business arrangement valid," Eugene said. "You can record the partnership without it." Leah already knew what she was going to say. Outside, Andrew stood beside the hitching rail. "Eugene says we don't have to marry." Andrew's face gave away nothing. "I heard him. My proposal still stands." This time there was no street full of people listening. Andrew glanced toward the courthouse window. "Why?" "Because Ralston is already trying to make our private lives part of his leverage. I won't give him that much room." "And that's all?" Leah held his gaze. "For today." Something in Andrew's expression eased. "All right." They were married 2 mornings later by a justice of the peace. Harold Tate wore a clean shirt that still smelled faintly of forge smoke. Mabel Cooper brought 2 late roses in a jar and pretended she had not gone to trouble over them. Leah wore her best brown dress. Andrew wore a black coat that fit his shoulders poorly and kept tugging at one cuff, as though he would rather face a stampede than stand before 4 people and repeat vows. When the justice finished, Andrew looked at Leah. He did not reach for her until she offered her hand. His fingers closed carefully around it. That night, Leah carried her valise into Rocking M. She found Andrew spreading a blanket on the narrow settee in the front room. She stopped. "You planning to sleep there? I figured you'd want the bedroom. I married you." Andrew straightened. Leah set down her valise. "I didn't surrender to you. There's a difference." "I know." "Then don't decide everything for me because you're trying to be decent." He looked almost embarrassed. "Where do you want me?" Leah glanced toward the bedroom, then back at him. "Tonight, on the settee." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Yes, ma'am." It was the first time she heard him laugh the next morning, though it was barely more than breath. Work gave them less trouble than marriage did. Leah reorganized the freight books and found a middleman taking a percentage from every Rocking M shipment. Within a week, she had arranged for 2 loads to go directly through a smaller wagon outfit. Andrew said nothing when she showed him the savings. He simply moved the good coffee from the upper shelf to the lower one, where she could reach it. A few days later, they took a mare across Dry Willow Creek. Halfway through, the animal panicked at loose stones under the water. Andrew caught the lead. Leah felt the mare fight harder. "Let go!" Andrew released it instantly. No argument. Leah turned the mare upstream, gave her room to see the bank, and walked her through. On the far side, Andrew handed Leah the reins. "You knew she'd follow the current. I knew she'd fight you. Most things do." Leah looked at him. "Maybe you're holding too tight." He considered that all the way home. The first autumn wind came down from the ridge one night and slammed the barn door hard enough to wake them both. A mare was foaling early. For nearly 2 hours there was no room for awkwardness between husband and wife. Leah held the mare steady while Andrew worked beside her. He spoke softly to the animal, his large hands moving with a patience that seemed almost impossible beside the stories Red Basin told about them. At last, the foal drew breath. Andrew sat back against the stall wall. His shirt was dirty, his hands were stained from the work. The newborn lay beside the mare, small enough that Andrew could have lifted it easily. Instead, he touched 2 fingers to its shoulder. Barely any pressure at all. Leah watched him. "Is that what they saw at Crow Ridge?" Andrew's hand stopped. "No." "What did they see?" He looked down at the foal. What happened when Gentle stopped working? He did not say more. Leah didn't ask. Not that night, but she already possessed something he did not know about. 3 days earlier, while sorting Isaac Prescott's papers, she had found a narrow tally book wedged beneath the lining of the tin box. It contained cattle counts from 6 years before. Crow Ridge, several totals had been corrected. Brands had been copied into the margins, then marked again beside different numbers, and the name Ralston appeared beside payments that had no clear purpose. Leah kept the book beneath her freight papers, not because she distrusted Andrew, because she did not yet trust what the numbers meant. A wrong accusation could ruin a man as surely as a wrong debt. She intended to verify everything first. She never got the chance. Andrew came into the storage room one afternoon looking for a bill of sale. A gust from the open window lifted several freight sheets from the table. He caught them. The tally book fell to the floor. Andrew picked it up. Leah entered just as he opened to the Crow Ridge pages. His face changed. Not anger, something quieter. He read Isaac Prescott's name, then Ralston's, then looked at her. "How long?" 3 days. "You knew your father had records from Crow Ridge." "I knew he had numbers. I don't know what they prove." "And you didn't tell me." "I was going to." "When?" "When I knew whether I was bringing you evidence or another rumor." Andrew closed the book. "You came here asking about my land, my books, my past." "Andrew, was I part of the bargain too?" That landed harder than if he had shouted. Leah went still. "No." "You expect me to believe that?" Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood. "I expect you to decide whether you know me well enough to believe it." He said nothing. Leah's voice dropped. "You can believe every story Red Basin ever told about you if that's what you want. But don't make me pay for the people who taught you. Everyone comes close because they want something." Andrew's eyes lowered. For one moment she thought he might apologize. A horse came hard into the yard before he could. The rider carried a county envelope. It was addressed to Leah. Eugene Walker had sent it. Inside was a copy of an affidavit filed that morning by Paul Ralston. Leah read the first paragraph standing beside the table, then the second. Her anger disappeared. The document stated that Isaac Prescott had surrendered his use of the northern dry willow water before his death. Without that water, Leah could keep Prescott Meadow. She simply could not build the life she had come to Wyoming to build. Andrew stepped closer. "Is that his signature?" Leah stared at the bottom of the page. Isaac Prescott, the slant of the P, the shortened final stroke, even the small hesitation her father always made before the last 2 letters. "It looks like it." Andrew took the document carefully. Then his eyes moved to the witness line. He stopped. Leah saw it too. The man who had supposedly witnessed her father surrender the water right was a name already written in Isaac's Crow Ridge tally book. The argument between Leah and Andrew was no longer the most dangerous thing in the room. By the end of the week, the affidavit had begun doing exactly what Paul Ralston wanted. A cattle buyer from Laramie postponed taking 40 Rocking M steers until the water dispute was settled. The feed merchant in Red Basin stopped extending Andrew 30-day credit. Leah sent word to 2 ranchers who had planned to board horses at Prescott Meadow and told them to wait. Nobody accused them of anything. Nobody needed to. Uncertainty did the work. On Sunday morning, Leah found a folded list in Andrew's coat pocket while hanging it beside the stove. 6 breeding mares, 2 young stallions, prices written beside each. She carried the paper outside. Andrew was repairing a broken wagon tongue near the barn. "What's this?" He looked at the sheet and went still. "Nothing yet. You're selling breeding stock. If we need an attorney..." Leah tore the paper once, then again. The pieces dropped beside his boot. Andrew stared at them. "I didn't come here so you could disappear piece by piece to keep me standing. It's livestock, Leah. It's 7 years of your work. Your land is under attack because you stood beside me." "No," she stepped closer. "My land was under attack before I knew your name." Andrew's jaw tightened. For several seconds, there was only the rasp of cottonwood leaves along the creek. Then he bent, picked up the torn pieces and tucked them into his pocket. Not to save them, to keep the yard clean. That was Andrew. Even defeated, he put things where they belonged. That evening, he came into the kitchen while Leah was checking Isaac's tally book against the affidavit. He set 2 cups of coffee down, one beside her, one across from her. Then he sat. Peter Lawson saw them changing brands. Leah's pencil stopped. Andrew looked at the table. 3 men, cattle that weren't theirs. Crow Ridge. He nodded. Peter was 16. Thought nobody saw him watching. Leah waited. They caught him. Andrew's fingers closed around his coffee cup, then loosened. "I got there before they finished." He did not describe the fight. He didn't need to. "I stopped them, got Peter onto Isaac Prescott's freight wagon before daylight. Told him to leave Wyoming and stay gone until it was safe. And you let the town believe you nearly killed 3 men for nothing. If I'd talked, Peter's name would have been in every saloon between here and Cheyenne. Why didn't you tell the truth later?" Andrew looked toward the dark window. Later kept becoming another year. Leah reached beneath her papers. She took out Isaac's tally book and placed it between them. No hiding now, Andrew opened it. Several minutes passed. Then his finger stopped on a line Leah had read a dozen times. I, Prescott, freight wagon, Crow Ridge South Road. Andrew looked up. "Your father." Leah leaned closer. "He moved cattle?" "Maybe." The word hurt more than she expected. The next morning, they took the book to Harold Tate. Harold read the entry and shook his head. Isaac wasn't stealing cattle. "How do you know?" Leah asked. "Because he came to my forge 2 days later, asking questions about brands." Harold pulled an old account ledger from beneath his counter. Dust lifted from the cover. "Your father noticed numbers didn't match. He started writing down everything: wagon weights, shoe replacements, freight stops." Andrew turned a page. Harold tapped an entry. "See there? Isaac paid me for a new shoe on the off-rear of his lead team. September 17th. Leah looked at the affidavit. Its date was September 17th. The investigation stopped being a rumor and became a trail. They followed it through ordinary things: a livery register, a freight receipt, Harold's shoeing account, a cattle tally, a notation from a bridgekeeper showing the Crow Ridge crossing had been closed after high water. Nothing dramatic, just facts that refused to fit Ralston's story. Harold also wrote to the last address he'd heard for Peter Lawson. There was no promise Peter would receive it. No promise he would come. 3 days later, Red Basin held the county hearing. The room beside the courthouse was too small for the crowd. Ranchers stood against the walls. Men from the feed store filled the doorway. Mabel sat in the second row with her hands folded over her handbag. Eugene Walker occupied the front table. Paul Ralston arrived with papers, a lawyer, and the calm expression of a man who expected patience to win for him. For the first half hour, it nearly did. Then Ralston stopped discussing water. He looked at Andrew. Funny thing about Mr. McBride's concern for lawful records. Andrew remained seated. Ralston turned toward the room. Some of you remember Crow Ridge. A chair creaked. Nobody spoke. Ralston walked closer. 3 men carried the proof of his temper for months. Leah saw Andrew's right hand close against his knee. Ralston saw it too. All you have to do is push the right place, he said softly, and he'll show everyone what he really is. Andrew stood. The room changed. Ralston was not a small man. Andrew still stood nearly a head taller. Somebody near the door stepped backward. Andrew's fist tightened. Leah did not touch him. She did not tell him to stop. This choice had to belong to him. Ralston took one more step. Andrew looked at him, then opened his hand. Slowly, he stepped back. Ralston smiled. That's what I thought. But Leah was no longer watching either man. She was looking at the affidavit. September 17th. She pulled Isaac's tally book toward her. Then Harold's account. Then a freight receipt they had found the previous evening. Her father had bought oats at a freight station more than 80 miles from Red Basin that same day. Harold's shoeing entry placed his team on the south road before that. The affidavit could not have been signed where Ralston claimed. Then Leah saw the witness name again. She turned 3 pages in Isaac's tally book. There it was, the same man, beside a cattle count that had been altered, beside a payment marked with Ralston's initials. Leah stood. Mr. Walker. Eugene looked toward her. I think you need to see these dates. The courthouse door opened before she could continue. Cold air moved through the crowded room. Harold Tate stood in the doorway. He had left Red Basin the previous evening without explaining why. Now he wasn't alone. A young man stood beside him in a dust-stained coat, hat held in both hands. He looked older than the frightened boy Andrew remembered, but Andrew recognized him before anyone spoke. His chair scraped against the floor. Peter? Peter Lawson looked at him. For a moment, 6 years seemed to pass between them without a word. Then Peter's eyes moved across the room. They stopped on Paul Ralston. Ralston's face lost its calm. Peter stepped inside. You weren't supposed to know I was still alive. Paul Ralston did not answer. For the first time since Leah had met him, the man seemed to have nothing prepared. Peter walked to the front table and set down his hat. Eugene Walker looked over his spectacles. Mr. Lawson? If you're going to speak, understand this is a county hearing. I understand. Peter's voice shook once, then steadied. He told them about Crow Ridge. 6 years earlier, he had seen 3 of Ralston's men changing brands on cattle that had strayed from a larger herd. They were moving the animals toward a side road that cut south toward Dry Willow. Peter had been 16. He had watched too long. They caught me before I made it back to camp. He did not describe every part of what followed. He did not need to. They were trying to make sure I wouldn't talk. Peter looked toward Andrew. Then he came. Andrew remained standing beside Leah. Peter continued. McBride hit those men. That's true. Ralston seized on it. There. Peter turned. He stopped when I got clear. The room went still again. He could have kept going. He didn't. Peter told them Andrew had taken him before dawn to Isaac Prescott's freight wagon. Isaac had hidden him beneath canvas until they cleared Crow Ridge. He said he'd keep records, Peter said. Said numbers don't scare as easy as people do. Leah lowered her eyes to her father's tally book. For a moment, she could almost hear him saying it. Eugene examined the documents Leah had laid out. The affidavit, Isaac's tally book, Harold's shoeing account, the freight station receipt dated September 17th, the altered cattle counts. Then Leah placed one finger beside the witness name on Ralston's affidavit. This man supposedly watched my father surrender the dry willow claim here in Red Basin. She turned the tally book. But on that same date, my father bought feed more than 80 miles south, and this witness appears in the Crow Ridge records beside a cattle count that was changed. Eugene's face hardened. Leah continued. There are payments marked with Ralston's initials. The same route those cattle used ran through the north wagon cut beside Prescott Meadow. Ralston stood. That's conjecture. Part of it is, Eugene said. He lifted the affidavit. But this document has enough problems that I'm suspending it pending examination. Ralston's lawyer leaned toward him. Eugene kept speaking. The water petition goes with it. These records will be forwarded to county authorities. Nobody cheered. That made the moment feel more real. Ralston had not been convicted, but he had lost the paper weapon he came to use. His face tightened. Then he turned toward Andrew. And you're all taking the word of a man who nearly killed 3 men? A few people shifted. There it was. The old story. The one Red Basin knew better than the truth. Andrew looked around the room. At the ranchers who used to stop talking when he entered. At Mabel Cooper. At Harold. At men from the feed store who had spent 6 years crossing streets before they had to pass him. Finally, he looked at Leah. She did not nod. She did not rescue him. She simply stayed where she was. Andrew faced the room. I hit those men. No excuse, no softening. I was angry enough that night to understand what I could do if I didn't stop. The room held its breath. Peter got clear. Andrew glanced toward him. So I stopped. Then he looked back at the town. I've spent 6 years doing the same thing. Ralston gave a bitter laugh. Andrew did not even look at him. I never needed this town to think I was harmless. His voice was quiet. I needed to know I could be. Nobody moved. A wagon rolled somewhere outside the courthouse. Its wheels passed over loose stones, then faded. Inside, Red Basin stayed silent. Not the old silence, not fear. Something else. Understanding, perhaps. Or shame. Andrew did not ask which. By evening, the hearing was over. Ralston's petition was suspended. His affidavit was under review. 2 ranchers who had been using his freight outfit quietly told Leah they wanted to discuss other arrangements. But Prescott Meadow still carried a secured note. Rocking M still had a cattle season to finish. Nothing had magically become easy. Over the next weeks, Leah collected the freight overcharges she had documented. She negotiated hauling work with 2 smaller ranches and set the money against her note. Andrew sold ordinary market cattle, not the breeding mares, not the young stallions. They made it through. Barely. But they made it through, with both properties still theirs. The night they finally knew Prescott Meadow would survive the season, Andrew came into the barn carrying the marriage agreement Leah had written months before. She was brushing dust from a sorrel mare. Your land's safe, he said, for now. You don't need the marriage for it anymore. Leah stopped brushing. Andrew held out the paper. There was no anger in his face. That made it harder. He was giving her freedom because he thought that was what love required. Leah took the agreement. I didn't know you when I proposed. Andrew looked down. That's the part I'd change. His fingers tightened once at his side. Leah folded the paper carefully, then placed it back in his hand. I'd ask you now. Andrew looked up. For once, the man who always had some quiet place to stand inside himself seemed to lose it completely. Then ask. Leah stepped closer. Andrew McBride, will you stay married to me when neither one of us needs the bargain? He looked at her for a long moment, then said the simplest word he had. Yes, Leah smiled. Andrew bent until his forehead rested gently against hers. Behind them, the sorrel mare scraped one hoof across the stall floor. Neither moved. 9 months later, a new sign stood between Prescott Meadow and Rockingham Ranch. Prescott and McBride Horse and Freight Yard. Prescott Meadow still belonged to Leah. Rockingham still belonged to Andrew. The land had not been swallowed into somebody else's name. They had simply built something between them. Leah boarded and conditioned horses, matched freight teams, and kept the books from a small office beside the tack room. Andrew handled cattle, breeding stock, and the pasture work. The first rough table he had built for her was gone. The repaired chair was not. One afternoon, a new cattle buyer stopped beside Harold Tate at the livery and pointed across the yard. "Which one's Big McBride?" Harold nodded toward a yearling horse dancing at the end of a lead rope. Andrew stood beside it. He did not jerk the rope, did not crowd the animal. He waited. The yearling tossed its head once, then again. Finally, it lowered its neck and stood. Andrew handed the rope to a ranch hand. From the office doorway, Leah called, "Andrew, I need you." He turned at once and walked toward her. The buyer watched him go. "That's the man everybody used to be afraid of?" Harold picked up a horseshoe from his bench. "Used to be, folks only knew half the story." Harold picked up a horseshoe from his bench. "Used to be, folks only knew half the story." Maybe that was the lesson Red Basin carried forward. Leah had arrived with a valise, a box of her father's papers, and 19 days to save a piece of ground. Andrew had spent 6 years believing silence was the safest way to live. Neither one came looking for romance. They came carrying work to do, debts to settle, and parts of themselves they had learned not to hand easily to another person. But trust rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it looks like a repaired chair beside a ledger table, a hand releasing a frightened horse because someone says, "Let go." A woman refusing to let a man sacrifice everything for her. A powerful man stepping backward when an entire room expects him to swing. And sometimes love begins as a bargain, only to survive long after the bargain is gone. Leah chose Andrew twice. The first time because circumstances brought their lives together. The second time because she finally knew the man standing in front of her. Andrew chose her differently. He respected the land that was hers, the decisions that were hers, and the strength she never asked him to provide for her. Maybe home is built that way, not by finding someone who needs saving, but by finding someone who sees your scars, your strength, and your dignity, and still chooses to stand beside you. If you had been Leah, would you have asked Andrew the second time? Tell me in the comments. And if stories about quiet courage, hard-earned trust, and unexpected love in the American West mean something to you, subscribe and stay a while. There are more journeys waiting down the trail, some mysterious, some painful, and some that may leave a little piece of healing behind.